It's really an honor. And if anybody's talking, then I can hear you, and it's kind of disruptive. So I just want to reiterate that. The title of my talk is A History of Native Archery of the Southwest USA, because I do intend to post this online sometime, and there might be an international audience, and that will keep the confusion down. Okay, but so by the Southwest, I mean North and West Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, Oklahoma, Northern Mexico, Colorado, and the desert areas of California and adjoining areas. It's not an actual, delineated place. It's kind of an idea or whatever. There's really too many groups ethnically to mention them all. I mean, you have everything from Apaches and Comanches and Cheyennes. You have people who were later buffalo hunters. You have corn farmers. You have hunter-gatherers, people living in caves down on the Pecos and Rio Grande rivers in Texas. You have people living out in the deserts in California, and all kinds of Pueblo people. Like I said, Apaches, many tribes of Apaches. And I mean, there's currently like 20 Pueblo tribes, and there might be 100 that are no longer around. So there's just too many of them to name them all. The Southwest looks like other places in the United States in that it was totally inhabited. All Native Americans, from what I've studied, have rich culture, mythology, and beliefs. They have completely different languages, and a lot of them shared technology, including bow and arrow. So the thing that makes the Southwest really unique, and those of you who live there are so lucky, because I really enjoy archaeology of the Southwest, is the dry climate and caves, which lead to some fantastic preservation of material that you just do not see anywhere else. So archery tackle, archery gear, that's to say, is 99% biodegradable. The wood, sinew, feathers, leather, and all those materials do not survive in most contexts. And it would be archaeologically invisible, except in the Southwest. And luckily in the Southwest, we have examples of the oldest bows and arrows, probably in North America, I would say in general terms. We have examples of the oldest bows in museums from when archery was first practiced in the New World. And so archery was preceded by the dart and atlatl. I'm hoping, I don't have any images of that, but I'm hoping that everybody knows what a dart and atlatl is. A dart is a giant arrow, basically, without a knock on the back. It has a little cup, and it's thrown with a throwing stick that has a hook made of either wood or deer antler or something like that, and it gives it a tremendous whip. So the natives were familiar with the aerodynamics of projectiles, though they didn't have bows. And I'm not sure, but I believe the dart and atlatl could be as old as Native Americans. So depending on how long you believe they've been here, which is kind of up in the air, looks like now at least 16,000 years. Some people are going to say 20,000 years. Some people are going to say a lot longer than that. So they knew all about projectiles because the arrow is at least 10,000 years older than the bow in the New World. And there's only 3 terms I need you to learn so that you can make sense. If you don't learn these terms, then the arguments are not going to make sense to you. But a bow, English has a lot of good archery terminology, and they see a bow as like a man that you have the back and the belly, and it bends easily toward the belly, and it does not bend easily. In fact, it can be bent catastrophically by bending it toward the back. So you need to see it that way. The archer, when he holds the bow, he's looking at the belly of the bow, and the bow bends from the back. And I should note right now that most bows break catastrophically by a small sliver pulling up on the back of the bow, and that immediately becomes huge and the bow explodes. And that happens in less than a second. But if you take the problem apart and look at it, you can see that almost always the bow breaks from a problem on the back of the bow. And the other term is the notch, and that's where the string is attached, if it has one. So let me go through and set up these slides. Okay, does that look good to everybody? First, I want to compare archery of the old world to archery of the new world. And by the new world, I mean...
Jack, I'm not seeing...
I don't think it's showing up.
You need to go to at the bottom where it says share screen.
Oh, yes. Hang on. Okay. Sorry, my fault.
No worries.
Yes, thank you very much.
And then you'll see a green, yeah, there. There you go.
Okay. How's that?
Good.
We're good? Okay. Do you see your images in the screen? No. Okay, I'll just proceed. Everything okay?
Yeah, we can see them.
Okay. So by the New World, I mean Alaska, Arctic Canada, North America, Central America, South America, you know, from everywhere people live from the north to Tierra del Fuego. And the old world is the whole rest of the world. So this dark area here, can you see the cursor?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. All this dark area represents archery finds, credible archery finds. Let me see, I'm hearing some feedback. In the old world, the oldest bow, the oldest complete known bow is 8,000 years ago. And this goes from zero, I'm saying like 1900, because that was the last time a bow and arrow was used in a practical sense anywhere, really. Well, maybe not, but in the United States. And then you have portions of bows, which are these little fragments, 15,000 years old. And then you have other portions that go back. And here at 40-something thousand years before the present is a credible archaeological report of arrowheads in a cave in Indonesia. And if you go back here, you have a credible archaeological report of arrowheads found in a cave in Africa. So, and then if you go to the New World, credible finds, the oldest known bows are from about 1,500 years ago only. And then you have other things. And about here, there are some arrows that have been found in the Arctic that are like 6,000 years old. But for some reason, this didn't seem to affect archery in general. And then you have, you know, after that, no finds back to whenever people came to the New World, let's say 20,000 years ago. So my thesis here tonight, let me just put this out here, is that it seems likely to me, it seems possible and likely that Native Americans actually rediscovered the bow for themselves. They already had the arrow, they already had a propulsion system, so all they needed is a new propulsion system, and you take that dart and you shrink it down, you have an arrow. It's an identical kind of thing. Let me see, I can't get to my instructions here to forward.
I think just hit the arrow.
The images of y'all's faces are would cover the arrow. there's something I can do about that? This didn't come up in the practice. Let me
You know-
try.
Jack, if you go to the on the top right, there's a black box where above all the pictures of the people. And
Yes,
click on that, and on the far left, there's a single little line. If you click on the blue line, the
I
small
got it.
one, they should disappear.
I got it. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Yes, that worked good. Thank you. I'm very technologically challenged this way. Okay, this is an internet image of the oldest bow found in Europe. This is called the Home Guard bow. It's a reproduction of an 8,000-year-old bow. And you'll notice how modern it looks. And the grip is narrow but deep. And the bow itself on the back is as flat as the tree would allow it to be. And this is the main difference between what I'm going to show you is the flat back. And by flattening out the back, you lessen the chance that the bow will break. No matter how you make the bow, it will still shoot the same, but it won't last unless you flatten the back somehow on a self bow, on a wood bow. This is also came from the internet, and this is a image from Primitive Archer magazine. It shows you how to make this bow. You can see how really modern this bow is. And on the back is flat. And even up on the toward the tips, the back is flat. And even at the tips, the back is flat. So, and the handle is very thick, so it's not going to break. It's deep. So actually, this is a totally modern type bow. And this bow has not been improved upon substantially for 8,000 years. It wasn't until the 20th century that they put a little rest on the bow for the arrow. 8,000 years. So this had been totally worked out by 8,000 years ago. So it probably took them 10 or 15 or who knows how many thousands of years. None of the oldest bows found are prototypes. They're all fully developed, fully functional. They found some bows that look just like medieval bows, like Utsi. He had a fully functional medieval style bow. Let's go to the Aztec ruins in New Mexico. And here's an example of a bow they put out here. This is, I say Anasazi. Okay, well, they're calling this ancestral Pueblo now. That just doesn't have the ring to me. We spent our whole lives learning the word Anasazi and what that means. But anyway, it's a Pueblo style bow from the time that archery was first used in the United States. They had these kind of bows in New Mexico, which I assume would represent the bows elsewhere. And it's nothing but like a broom handle or a closet pole that's been tapered on the end. This is the worst possible scenario for a bow of somebody who doesn't know. If this was a tree branch without any tapering on it, had a string on it, you would not recognize it as a bow. The only thing that makes this recognizable as a bow is that it tapers on the end. This is only the very first step in making a bow and the understanding of wood breaking and stuff like that, tapering the bow. There was nobody from the old world who taught the natives how to make bows, because by 500 AD, everybody in the world knew how to make the most sophisticated bows you could make practically. They were making things like musical instruments. They were as complicated as musical instruments in Asia and even, you know, in a lot of other places. This bow is, this is the very first step you can take in making a bow. This is why my thesis is like this. And this bow remained popular for 300 to 500 to 700 years in the New World. It's just, the question with me is, well, when people came to the New World, let's say 18 or 20,000 years ago, the bow was spread all over the old world, all over. And peoples of Siberia, which Native Americans are reputed to have come from, surely had the bow and arrow because it was being used in historic times for their subsistence strategy. And it doesn't seem like, you know, if it was being used for 60,000 years in Africa, possibly, whether you believe that or not, or 40,000 years or Indonesia, at least for 30,000 years, or at the very minimum 20,000 years ago, everybody in the world knew about the bow and arrow. So the people came from the old world with the bow and didn't find it useful. That seems very unlikely. The only other scenario, which is even seems more unlikely, is that for 14 to 18,000 years, nobody came to North America to teach them how to make a bow. And it wasn't until 500 AD that they first started making bows. So it's like, to me, you know, there's a span of 14 to 18,000 years there where they just could have used the bow and arrow and didn't. It's a mind-boggling kind of idea. But at any rate, I'd like to discuss it with you. Here's the tip of that bow, has no nocks. The string was simply wrapped around the end. And this is at the Temple Artifact Show. I love artifact shows because guys have interesting stuff. And sometimes it's hard to get into the storage of museums, but not into the artifact collectors. And this guy has 2 bows, and he doesn't know what these other objects are, I'll bet. But this one is just the same way. It's a little more sophisticated because it has more taper, has nice decoration on it. And this one here, I'd say by these eyes on here, it looks like a small cedar tree that has just a little bit of tapering on the ends. But nevertheless, cedar is a good bow wood. Here's a couple more painted. The Anasazis would wrap things around arrows and bows like string, and then paint it, and then take the string back off, and you'd have these spiral, sometimes these are actually spiral designs. And then what they were using for arrows was Phragmites cane. I wish I had a picture of this. I call it ditch cane. You find it in all the ditches all over. Actually, it grows all over the world. It grows on every continent in the world. And it looks like bamboo, but it's actually a little weaker. And it blooms in October and has a little white foxtail that goes up into the air. And it has a real thick, fluffy one. That's actually another cane that's been imported from China hundreds of years ago. But this one's native to the New World. It's called Phragmites, and if I'm saying that correctly. And this is what, like 100% of the ancient arrows were made out of this kind of cane. This is the Deming Luna Membris Museum. More bows, more cane arrows. And close up of the arrows, you can see this is the knock end of the arrow. And when the knock is as shallow as this is, it means that they were actually had to hold the arrow onto the string. So they were holding the arrow and the string at the same time, meaning that they were using one of the numbered groups, primary, secondary, or tertiary. All of those you're actually holding, you're pinching the arrow and pulling the string back with your fingers. And there's cresting, which means painting the arrow. This goes on underneath the feathers. And everybody identified, you see all these arrows are actually slightly different. And if you had a whole bunch of archers shooting together, you'd be able to identify if all your arrows were painted the same, you'd know which ones you had. And what they have is a lashing here on the knock to keep the string from splitting the arrow. And then toward the back, you have what I call a trailing fletch lash. It holds down, it's a winding of sinew and glue that holds down a bare place on the feather. And then you have the same in the front, the leading edge. And I want to show you a close-up. See, you can see a little bits of the quill still trapped underneath the leading fletch lash. So they would tie the back down first, and then they would stretch the feathers forward. And if they were going to glue them, they would glue them at that point, and then they would tie them in the front. So this one keeps the arrow from splitting. This one holds the back of the fletch. This one holds the front of the fletch. And then there's one in the front with the point. Okay, this is gonna hopefully be interesting to some people, and this is part of the argument. Then in the front of the cane, this was inserted. It was sort of whittled down at this point, and there's some glue still on there, and was put in the front of the cane. And then the lashing at the point. But you see this one never held an arrowhead, as we say, an arrowhead, nor this one. These two are broken, would be hard to tell from this picture, but these are called unarmed arrows. Means it has no arrowhead. This arrow would be totally invisible archaeologically. Now there's nothing to preserve that, and that argument about a 63,000-year-old arrowhead in a cave in Africa. Well, I've seen pictures of those things and they're nothing but chips of flint that have little points on them. But I'll tell you, if you take an arrowhead like this and put a little groove in it and put in any flake of flint, any little piece of, you know, a flake of flint is like a razor blade, and I don't care if it has a totally flat edge on it like a chisel. They actually make those in other parts of the world. It's going to increase its penetrability. But at least half of all the native arrows ever made are unarmed arrows and have no arrowhead on them. And of course, if it's got an arrowhead like this, there's no argument of what that could be. I think this is, I'm not sure which museum I got that from. Shame on me. If it looks like this, also there's a discussion where people have a hard time telling a large arrowhead from a small dart point. Now, an archer can usually tell because dart points are a lot thicker, and when these things start to look like stalagmites, they would have very poor penetration on an arrow, but the penetration would still be good on a dart because the dart would have a lot more weight behind it. It would actually keep it from breaking so easily. But an arrowhead, a true arrowhead, needs to be thin and delicate, have a very sharp point to actually improve its penetrability. And these come in all shapes and sizes. This is from the Colson Archaeological Laboratory that Scott Bruskowski works for up in the Panhandle. They come in every shape and size, and they're not hard to tell that they are arrowheads and differentiate them from dart points. Okay, here's another theme which many of you may have never heard from. This is a paper by the Peabody at Harvard University. And this regards what I call arrow shrines and archery shrines. Because in New Mexico, when somebody died, people would take their bow and mainly not the good bows of people who are still alive, but broken bows, and they would take them to caves and they would just leave them in caves. And so we find bows that are damaged and also entire bows in caves. And I'll tell you why they did this. Because when they buried somebody, they put them in the ground, and they believed that after a certain length of time, their spirit would leave the body and go into the underworld, and that the underworld was a world just like the one we're living in. And people did the things that they do in this life, but they're separated from us from a layer of dirt. I don't know how thick they would think that would be or whatever, but a cave is an opening like a grave. It opens, I mean, at some point it just, you know, withers down toward the ground, and that either actually or spiritually, it was seen as an opening to the underworld. So they were special places, caves were. And people would take arrows, and every one of these has a different crest on it. This is one of their illustration of arrows that were found at the Waco Tanks area. And these are just fabulous if you look at them. I mean, the original paint jobs were just, oh, I'm so inspired by them. And these are some of the patterns. They're either textile patterns or pottery patterns or like that. And each one of these, see, was made by a different person. The knocks are different. The lashings are different. And so they would bring arrows from far away, and they would, some of these had been wrapped on the end where they would take, I mean, like struck on the end, and the arrow point slightly damaged. And they saw that as being sufficient that it was then dead. And then they would bundle these things by the hundreds and put them in caves and leave them for offerings. So the idea is that just like a body, you put it in the ground, the body stays there, but the spirit goes to the underworld. Well, the arrow stays in the cave, but its spirit has already gone into to the afterlife to be with your ancestors and friends. So if battle is still going on in the afterlife, or hunting is still going on in the afterlife, this would be helpful to your relatives and your friends. And so Waco Tanks is a site near El Paso. It's a very unusual site, and it's famous for other things too, cave paintings and habitation sites and stuff. But also in the Gila Mountains, there's such a site, and there's also bows at the Gila site. There's one at the Ghost Ranch in Abiquiu. I think that's it, New Mexico. And there's also one in northern Mexico, and where they just leave dozens and hundreds of them, each one being made by a different person, being brought one at a time as an offering and leaving it in this cave. And we don't know exactly what that means. Okay, this is from a book. It's called Spirits of the Art, and it's from the collection of Forrest Fenn. A lot of people probably know who he is. He's a very unusual person. He was a Santa Fe art dealer who took to artifact collecting. And because he's an individual, you don't know where these items came from, but you can hardly blame some farmer or rancher 100 years ago if he goes into a cave overhang and he finds a bow and a bunch of arrows from collecting them. So it would be helpful maybe to know where they came from, but we're not gonna get to know ever where these came from. So let me just explain these. The first bow at the top has that painted technique where they wrap something around the bow, then painted it and then unwrapped it. And so you have this spiral on it, and it's nothing but a design on the bow. The next one is a little bit different in the evolution of bow making, and that is to keep down splinters from pulling up on the back and catastrophically destroying the bow in a moment. They put all these wrappings, these lashings of sinew every inch or two along the bow to help protect it. And this is kind of an intermediate step of moving forward and improving how the bow works. You see, they haven't flattened out the bow yet though. And I assume they could have if they knew about it, but they haven't done this. And then you have this bow here, which is like, this is a fantastic discovery. And the thing that makes this bow different is this cable right here, this string. It's a heavy string, not much different than the bow string. And it's made out of twisted sinew, and it is tied on the nocks. And all these wrappings are an attempt to keep it onto the back of the bow so it won't fall over like it's done here. These sinew lashings have probably become loose with age, or the bow dried out or something and it slipped over. But when the bow is used, it has to be right here on the center of the back of the bow. And this takes a lot of the strain of the bow and actually makes it into a composite bow. It makes it into a sinew-backed bow. But the thing that's really fantastic about this is that this technique is done in the Arctic. And until the early 20th century, Yupik peoples of Alaska and probably St. Lawrence Island also were making cable-backed bows and hunting with them. And so this bow seems to be kind of a hybrid. It's got a cable backing the way that was done in the Arctic, but it's done on a typical Pueblo Anasazi style self bow. But that would make this very much influenced toward the Athabascans. And the modern Athabascans would be Apaches and Navajos. And they came into the Southwest about, let's say 1200 approximately AD. So the peoples were still using these kind of bows when this kind of bow arrived. We're going to go to the University of Utah Museum in Salt Lake City. And there is a cave there that has, it's called Promontory Cave. And y'all who are familiar with it know it's famous for having 250 moccasins in the cave. And I was just there visiting and I saw these moccasins. Everybody knows about them but me. They were found in the 30s and stuff. But if you've ever studied Native American moccasins, you immediately recognize that these moccasins are all Canadian style moccasins, the very same kind of moccasins and this patterning and everything that modern Athapaskans use in their moccasins. And they also, besides the moccasins, left these arrows. And the arrows are Phragmites cane. You can see the knock lashing. And this one here is cane. You can see the node, the break in the joint in the cane. And it has the lashing in the back. It has the trailing fletch lashing to hold down the quill back here. And it has the leading fletch lashing here. But the fletching is 3 times as long as what was currently being used in the Southwest. So this is a hybrid arrow. They're using, I'm sure they didn't have Phragmites cane in the Arctic. I've never seen anybody using that, but it's a Southwest style arrow, but it's repurposed for Athapascan. So this is the arrow that goes with the previous bow. Okay, let's move forward. The bow's brought in at 500 AD. Very weak evidence at that point. We have very strong evidence for the bow at 700 AD. The bow stays unchanged, that round cross-section bow. This is a mural, a Kiva mural from Awadavi, which is a site on First Mesa in Arizona. And it's hard to date this exactly. It couldn't be any earlier than about 1180, 1200, and goes up to first Spanish contact, which would put it around 16 something. So you have a pretty large window that this could be. And I don't have this paper and haven't read it, but let's just say this is 1450 approximately. It would be a median date. And this is a hunter or a warrior, and he's now holding a double curved bow. This is not that single curved bow that we have seen all along. It's now a double curved bow. And these are become the standard all over the Central Plains and on down into the Southwest. This bow has a magic shape to Native Americans. It's hard to put this shape into a bow and still make it symmetrical. They're often sinew backed, and the quiver is so interesting. I just couldn't help but, you know, love it when I saw this. But the yellow color and the long pennant here at the opening indicates that this is a mountain lion. Now I'll tell you how I know that, because any of you who have ever had experience with furs knows that they are dressed in the following manner. There's a slit made between the legs, and then the thing is peeled off the animal like a piece of clothing. And it's called a cased skin. It makes a tube out of the skin, and it includes the tail, and you put a slit down the tail and open it up flat. And you have, this is a mountain lion. They don't use the head and they don't use the paws. So those are cut off, and the place where they were at is sewn closed. You have the back legs back here and the front legs right here and the head here, but those are tossed out. So you have basically what's being used in the 20th century by furriers as a cased skin. And the yellow color and the very long tail, which is almost as long as the quiver itself, indicates that this is a mountain lion. And also, if you'll see the arrows here, they have long barred feathers, not the short feathers of the previous Pueblo, but long barred feathers. And one feather, they have at least 2 feathers on each arrow. You couldn't tell if it had 3 from this painting, but the one on each arrow is dyed red. And this is very interesting because, I mean, they go ahead and do this for the next, you know, until the end of archery. Here's some more of those. A Awadavi. This is stylized, but it's the same thing. It has the tail. And also it has a you know, a carrying strap on it. Here's what they're getting to. This is a 19th century version. This is made out of cow skin, you can tell by this, but Indians hunted cows even when they were free roaming. And it's a three-piece assembly. It's a quiver here, with the arrows would stick out here. There's a bow case. In this view, it's in back, but the bow case is actually in front. And it has a sash, which is very long because you don't wear it over your shoulder like they always show. You wear it over both shoulders, and you cover your clothing completely. And even in the winter, you'd put on a blanket first and put this over, and the bow case would hold your blanket closed at your throat. Actually, I'll show you another view so you can understand it a little better. Here's the bow case here. Here's the quiver. Here's another one. The bow case actually lies on top of the quiver because the first thing you have to do is take the bow out and string it. And when you do that, because it's a long tan tube, then it just drapes and hangs down the two ends and out of the way. And then the quiver is available, and you take the arrows out and start shooting or whatever. And this one has these holes in here. It makes it Apache, very obviously Apache in the style. Let's see, I want to show you some other thing. It also has this stiffener. It's a stick here, and it's attached to the sash because without the stiffener, then the arrows have to support the whole assembly, and it makes the arrows warp. So the stiffener is almost always included in the bow case. And I think this is like Museum of the Southwest, I would say, or sorry, this is from the Gilcrease Museum. And this is a very long quiver, you see. It has a stiffener right there. It has the sash. There's no bow case on this. It's a quiver only, but it has red cloth in back of the cutouts. This makes it very obviously an Apache. This is the 19th century. We're moving forward. And I think in this case, he's still using cane arrows. Okay, this is from visible storage in the Gilcrease. This now is the standard. You have a double curved bow. It's not deeply double curved because it's made out of just wood, and it's very hard to get the bow to do that without breaking. So if the bow has a very drastic bend in it somewhere, it's mostly sinew backed. The string is tied at the lower end and has a noose. Sometimes it has a loop, but mostly has a noose that holds onto the bow, so you can slide this into the bow case backwards with this end showing, so that when you go to pull it out, the string doesn't get tangled. The string would get tangled pushing it in, but not pulling it back out. And arrows are now made out of hardwood, shoots, not lumber, out of shoots of some agreeable material. And this is now the standard, and they also have metal points on them. Stone points were pretty much, by the late 1700s, going out of phase, and the Indians only used stone points if they couldn't get metal. But metal was very popular, and they used anything they could find to make a metal point out of. This is a modern copy of a double curved sinew-backed bow, and the sinew has to be tied down in the middle because it will try to bridge this area and pop up off the grip. And so you can see it's rounded, but it's getting toward flat. Sinew string tied at one end and the noose fitted over the other end. Panhandle Plains Museum. This I would describe most likely, this looks like a backing here, this dark area, and the very extreme bend at the handle. And I would, if I had just had to guess, I would say this is a Mescalero bow. They made some of the most wonderful sinew-back bows you've ever seen, tied at the bottom, looped at the top, and the string is broken, and they tied it back in a knot. And this is the main purpose for tying at the bottom. Not only can you readjust it whenever you need to, but if the string breaks and you're out on the warpath, you don't have time to make a new string, or you might not have an extra string. So you simply untie it, tie that thing together, and then readjust it here, and you're ready to go again. A lot of old bows were being used it's like running around on a spare tire. They did that. It's very common. Nice to see on that one. Okay, this is, see, Hickorea. I think this is a Museum of the Southwest in Santa Fe. Double curved bow, sinew string, hardwood arrows, no joints for the cane, and steel points. Hickorea, 19th century. Okay, this is from the Blanco Canyon. And you see the arrowheads come in lots of different shapes and sizes, and even materials. They made them out of any scrap of iron that they could get by chiseling them out and filing them. They have found chisels, they had found files, and they would use the face of an axe for an anvil, and they would use old irons. All these are things that they could obtain and trade. And people said they just can't, a lot of times people just can't see Indians riding around with a, with a file or a chisel or metalworking tools. Well, sorry folks, they went to the traders, and the traders had all these for people who were out there and needed to sharpen knives and do stuff like that. And so the Indians had all these things too. They're finding them archaeologically in their sites. These are made out of brass kettles. They used to cook out of these kettles that looked like a bucket. And when they would get worn from scraping it with a spoon or corroding, being over the fire, they would get holes in them and they would no longer hold water. So they would take them at that point and chisel them up and cut them up and put little teeth on them. And this is the place where the attachment is done. This one is made out of silver. This is a solid sterling silver arrowhead, and it was the handle of a spoon or a fork. So this might have been good for shooting at vampires or maybe zombies. I don't know, but this is the only sterling silver. Can't be unique, but I'm sure there's another one out there, but I haven't seen it. From the Blanco Canyon. This is in the Crosbyton Museum in Crosbyton, Texas. He's a local collector, and I asked him, did he use a metal detector? He said no, he would just get permission from his fellow ranchers and go out there and just look for stuff. He had a fine collection. This arrowhead hit a rock, rolled up because it was iron, not steel, broke off of the arrow, was laying out there somewhere. They could find the arrow and collect it, but the arrowhead was gone. So they needed lots of extra arrows. These are actual old plain style arrows. I want to say that a lot of this equipment is really hard to tell which tribe it belonged to. And people say you can tell. Sometimes you can, but mostly you can't. Hardwood arrows, all the Pueblos had them. All the peoples of the desert had these kind of things. All the people in the mountains had these. All the people in the plains had very similar equipment. Very long fletching, one lashing at the knock, one at the leading fletch edge, and one at the arrowhead. It's a fletching, look like bird of prey. You see other birds, feathers used one time, sometimes, but the most preferred of them all are bird of prey, because bird of prey have a hunting association with arrows. And today it's very popular used in turkey, and I tell people for reproduction purposes, if you're making that, a turkey was the prey and is not the best symbolic thing to put on an arrow. You don't want to be the prey, you want to be the hunter. These are arrows, arrowheads. These look just like ones found in archaeological sites. You can see the file marks here, all done by hand. And the painting was done on top of this sinew lashing. Out in the desert, people still used cane, Phragmites cane, and this is how the foreshaft was attached. Later on, the foreshafts became longer, and because this is a smooth transition, you can actually pull the arrow back as far as you want to onto the foreshaft. Metal points, long fletchings, sinew lashings. Also, Some of them, this is called a compound arrow because it's made out of more than one stick. This is how you can make arrows if you live out in the desert and there's not good materials long enough to make a arrow out of a single piece. You simply assemble them together. This is arrowweed, which is a very ubiquitous plant all over the South. You can find them if you I live in Houston. If you start driving west, before you get to San Antonio, you already see these things growing on the side of the road. They're everywhere. And if I told you, showed you one of these plants and said they made arrows out of it, you'd think I was crazy. You may as well try to make an arrow out of a spear of asparagus or something, but actually it's very effective, makes a really excellent arrow. You see them around sometimes. Long fletchings. These are from the Smithsonian online. These were all collected after a Comanche battle. It could be also Cheyennes or Kiowas because they all ran together. But they also probably had similar equipment. You can see they're all made like other plains arrows. 1870s. Oh, maybe I missed one. Hang on. Yep, this is a nice quiver. I'm not sure what tribe it is. It has a little flap over the quiver the arrows completely disappear down inside. You can see this is a left-handed quiver because the openings of the quiver and the bow case both face left, as most of them do. That way, when you whip it around to the front of you to take the bow out, the bow is now on the right. So a left-facing quiver is very useful for a right-handed person. You'll find that most of them are actually left-handed. I don't know how they say that. Any rate, left-handed quiver is good for a right-handed person. Beadwork, always nice beadwork found on some quivers. If you guys like beadwork, it's a good source of seeing stuff. This one's Cheyenne, Southern Plains tribe. They have very indicative style beadwork, but you never know if the bow or the arrows were actually belong to that quiver dot because people would change them out. There's no way to actually identify that. There's some nice beadwork. These are very desirable pink colored beads. Hard to find beads in the day, in the 1800s. Here's the best quiver ever made. It's made out of a jaguar skin. This was in the Charlie Eagle Plume collection. I think it now is the Boulder, Colorado Museum. Here's the sash. It's become unattached. It has some places here where it would have been attached to the stiffener. This could be the stiffener or this could be an arrow cup. There's a little device for dragging all the arrows out at once called an arrow cup. At any rate, you can see the jaguar also has a very long tail, and they spared no expense in making this the finest. This is the best. There's nothing to compare this to. Maybe there's another one somewhere, but you can see it has all the same attributes, some sort of a bird of prey feather, probably, hardwood arrow, metal points. The text is totally flawed on this. It's just crazy what they say. They somehow associated this African spear with the whole thing. It just shows you how things get mixed up sometimes. The African spear has nothing to do with the bow and arrow. This one's from Mexico. This is Tarahumara, compound arrows made with arrowweed and some hardwood, very hard to tell. The bow is very slightly double curved. You see, it just makes a nod toward the design of double curve where they didn't go to too much effort. It's tied on the back, has a noose on the front. I would say it looks like mulberry to me. I don't know if they have that wood down there. Copper Canyon would be the Tarahumara, Copper Canyon. Some of the Tarahumara worked for the U.S. Army as Army Scouts, Indian Scouts they call them, tied at the bottom. Anytime you see a bow like this, you know it's authentic. Very hard, very few artificers know how to make a sinew string properly. Another Tarahumara. You see now they've completely gone to a rectangular shape. This is the safest shape to make for a bow because you have equalized all the tension on the back of the bow. The belly doesn't matter. You can carve it any way you want to, make it rough. You just taper it. But this bow has a perfect backing on it, which means it will last a long time. This is actually for young children. They give them to them at Easter time to shoot at effigies of the devil. So I think this shows a lot of cultural difference between, let's say, a modern American and a 1950s or early 1900 Tarahumara. They're giving these needle-pointed arrows to a bunch of kids, you know, young children. And this is kind of indicative. The tip of the bow is shows tribal association, this one triangular, and this is a rawhide string, very unusual for North America, but not so much for other places. They're used all over the world, rawhide, but the Indians didn't seem to, North American Indians didn't seem to use rawhide very much. And these look like, to me, Rhode Island red chicken feathers that have been split and put on here, and no trailing fletch lash. There's a leading one and then one back here toward the back. And this material, I think this is arrowweed, has a pith in the middle. So by making a beveled shaped knock, the sort of half round arrow knock reveals itself. Okay, we're at the Gila Cliff Dwellings in New Mexico. Here are a hickory bow, and thank you. My water just arrived. I'm going to take a little sip here. Thank you, Karen. Hickory bow, self bow, wood bow. You see here's an unarmed arrow with just a wooden point on it, and compound arrows with stone points. The Apaches, they had a lot of fighting going on. They had a hard time stopping and getting stuff to make arrowheads with, and they used flint points a little longer than some of the others. You can see there's no exact size. I mean, this arrow probably was only pulled back to this point here, but it has a stone point on it, a long foreshaft. These are two Ute bows, sinew backed, completely covered with sinew. Lovely. This is what happens when a museum person or a collector tries to string a bow backwards and doesn't know. You'd see any of us would put the string on it this way. That would be strung. Actually, this bow is turned inside out to string. Without knowing that, you wreck the bow. These are some arrows. I don't know if these arrows are associated with these bows, probably not. And here's the knock on this one, very unusual. It has a little scoop at the top. We're looking at the back of the bow, and the sinew goes over the back of the bow. It makes a 180-degree turn and comes down onto the belly of the bow, and this keeps it from pulling off the wood, and then it's tied down with sinew here this way. And we'd love to see this crunchy texture because it was glued and put together over 100 years ago. But this seems to be very indicative, this shape of a Ute bow. This is a double curved self bow, I think, if I'm not mistaken. I can't tell. I think so. Here we are up close. Oh, I'm not sure. Usually this is done to hold the sinew backing on, but at any rate, this is a lovely crunchy surface. And you see the sinew string, very nicely made. Black Range Museum in New Mexico. I think that's, if I'm not Lordsburg, but maybe Farrellsburg, or I don't know. I was going to look that up and didn't. And they had this nice Apache bow and arrow. And here's the Apache arrows almost disappear into the quiver. And a self bow, you can see the outside of the tree. This is a safe way to do it. They've worked it into somewhat rectangular lenticular shape, which is safe. They haven't cut through these knots. So they didn't have anything very good to make a bow out of, but that's New Mexico. And they're still using cane arrows, late 1800s, middle to late 1800s. This is the University of Illinois. This is a great author and artifactor, Reginald Laubin. This is a reproduction he's made out of a mountain lion. skin. You can see the long tail, a fantastic decoration. The paws used at the end of the sash for decoration. This is our hero, Quanah Parker, with a very short bow with a rectangular cross section, no grip, no decoration, no nothing, just a piece of wood and a string. Here is that bow or a similar bow. This is at the Ranch Heritage Museum in Lubbock, Texas. This is part of the Burke Burnett family collection. They used to graze their cattle at the Quanah Parker or at the Comanche property in Oklahoma, and they would pay what's called grass money. And Quanah Parker knew that he liked Indian stuff, so Burke Burnett has a museum, their own family, their own museum quality collection of bows and arrows. Quanah Parker bow can't get any better. Osage orange with a single notch at the top with a loop and tied at the bottom. Hardwood arrows, hawk, barred feathers. I think Scott pointed out, I think he said ferruginous hawk and red tail hawk. So all hawk feathers. This is in the Star of Texas Museum in Navasota, found in a cave with a part of a bow case. And always try to investigate. And this one is rounded on the top with a single notch. And the closest I could find to it in a museum turned out to be Delaware. And if that it doesn't seem very likely to you, there were actually in the late 1800s, Delaware Indians came to Texas, and a lot of other Indians too, a lot of other tribes that you wouldn't expect. So I couldn't say definitely, but it's most similar to a Delaware bow. And this is my last little group of slides. This handsome gentleman is a hunting horse. He was the last scout hired by the U.S. Army as an Indian scout. He worked only 3 months before they dissolved the Indian Scouts. And an interesting story about him is while he was working for the Scouts, Custer came to Fort Sill where he was stationed and asked him to go with him on a campaign. And he went and asked his supervisor, who I think was General Sherman or Sheridan maybe. And his general said, no, I have other plans for you. And so Custer went with other guys and they went on to the Little Bighorn. So he probably wouldn't have made it. Here he is with his 7 daughters. And he married 2 sisters, which they said created harmony in a marriage because the sisters were already getting along and wouldn't be competing against each other. You don't have to name one the first wife and the other one the second wife. And he gave archery demonstrations his whole life. Here he is getting older now. The bow is kind of longer than some of the ones we've seen. It's also got a tassel up here of horsehair, and here's his arrows. He's using the tertiary grip in which he uses his thumb to pinch the arrow onto his other fingers. Here's that bow or a similar bow. I want to show you the one in the picture has a weak place here. You see it's bending more here than it is in the upper limb. So to me, it looks like it has a weak place here, which is not a good thing for a bow to have on it. This bow in a private collection has a weak place on it. It's covered with a patch of deer hide that's been sewn onto it. It has one sewn on the other side just to kind of balance it out. Other than that, it's a double curved bow dark bow with a sinew string made of Osage orange, double knock at the bottom where it's tied, single knock at the top. Here's that patch over a bad place on the bow. It has splinters coming up. And it even says, we don't know who carved this onto the bow. It says born 1847. There's another inscription that identifies it as his bow. I believe it's correct. This is in a collection of some associates of hunting horses. So it has perfect provenance. It was actually came from hunting horse. So and here's his military grave marker. Kyle, Indian Scout, born 1846, died in 1953. Do the math. He was 107 years old when he died. So I don't know, hopefully archery is good for your longevity. Any rate, are there any questions?